In rooms filled with classified documents and intelligence briefings, your name was spoken. Not in passing, not as an afterthought, but with urgency. The corridors of influence, the places where world-shifting decisions are made, were shaken by what they uncovered about you. A truth so undeniable that even those sworn to secrecy could not ignore it. The White House National Security Advisor, a figure tasked with guarding the deepest governmental secrets, saw something that unraveled the entire narrative they had built. It wasn't just knowledge they discovered, it was a revelation. One that made them question everything they thought they knew. One that left them with no choice but to walk away. Because what they found wasn't just a report, a file, or a theory. It was proof. Proof that you are not ordinary. Proof that you are divinely orchestrated, a disruption to the very fabric of their control. And most dangerously of all, proof that their power has limits, but yours does not. They knew keeping this secret meant keeping their position, but leaving meant keeping their sanity. And so the advisor resigned. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Because once you see the truth, there's no unseeing it. In a room dimly lit by the glow of digital screens, intelligence officers whispered among themselves. Their faces were tense, their hands uneasy as they flipped through classified documents filled with information they never expected to encounter. Your name appeared where it shouldn't have. It wasn't in some criminal file, nor was it attached to any political scandal. It was embedded in something far deeper, something that threatened to shake the very core of their understanding. A high-ranking official leaned in, scrolling through satellite data, ancient texts, and intercepted messages. This can't be real, he muttered under his breath. But the more he read, the more undeniable it became. The system has always relied on control, controlling the narrative, controlling information, and controlling the masses. But one thing they never accounted for was you. You were hidden in plain sight, moving through life unnoticed by those who sought to suppress true power. Yet somehow, through a crack in their perfectly constructed web, they stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to find. Evidence of who you really are. Not just a person, not just another name in a database, but a force that exists outside of their reach, outside of their dominion. A being whose presence has been prophesied long before their institutions were even formed. In a sealed briefing, military officials and intelligence heads gathered, their voices tense. "What does this mean?" someone finally asked. The response was silence, followed by an undeniable truth. "It means we've underestimated them. It means they're not just another citizen. They're something else, something we don't understand. Because your existence isn't random. Your gifts aren't accidents. The power flowing through your spirit is not something they can categorize with science or control with laws. It transcends their understanding because it was never meant to be contained." What they found was more than just traces of your influence. They found proof that your very essence disrupts the system itself. The way you move, the way you think, the way you refuse to conform. It's all a part of a grander design. One that was never meant to be controlled by worldly powers. And that's what made them nervous. The White House National Security Advisor stood at the edge of that classified room, staring at the reports with wide eyes. This wasn't just a breach in security. The world has always tried to bury the truth. They've built empires on deception, systems on suppression, and entire histories on half-truths. But one thing they never accounted for was Yeshua's plan, an ancient blueprint that ensured the chosen would rise when the world least expected it. They searched for you, but they couldn't find you. Not because you were hiding, but because you were hidden by design. The Most High knew the moment your light was revealed, the world would shift. So he allowed the system to overlook you, to dismiss you, to believe you were insignificant. But now, the appointed time has come. And just like Yeshua's own arrival, they weren't ready for it. The intelligence agencies, the power structures, and those who claim control, they've all studied patterns. They track influence, watch movements, and anticipate shifts in power. But what they never expected was something they couldn't predict. A divine anomaly written into time itself. The very same way Yeshua came into the world unnoticed by kings, yet shook every throne. You too have been placed in this timeline with a purpose beyond human comprehension. For years, they have gathered intelligence, cross-referencing events, tracing genealogies, trying to understand why certain individuals disrupt the system effortlessly. But the answer was never in data. It was in destiny. When they dug into your history expecting to find weakness, they found prophecy. When they analyzed your patterns, expecting to find randomness, they found divine alignment. When they searched for limitations, they found none. And that's when the fear set in. Because they realized the same force that walked with Yeshua walks with you. That's why they tried to keep you distracted. That's why they designed the world to keep you asleep. The blueprint was never meant for everyone to see. Only those with spiritual eyes would recognize it, and only those who were called would walk in it. And yet here you are, awakened in a time when the world thought you'd stay blind. The resignation of the National Security Advisor wasn't a random event. It wasn't politics as usual. It was an act of surrender to something greater. Because once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. And when those in power glimpse even a fraction of what's unfolding, they are left with a terrifying realization. They never had control to begin with. They spent years constructing systems to keep power in their hands. Yet one chosen soul walking in divine alignment can dismantle everything they built. That's why the fear is real. That's why the panic has begun. They have finally recognized what Yeshua declared over 2,000 years ago. The deeper they searched, the more they realized something wasn't adding up. The intelligence agencies had spent years tracking bloodlines, mapping genealogies, and tracing patterns of influence. They believed power was inherited through money, status, and legacy. But then they stumbled upon something they couldn't explain. You. There was no logical reason why you should be different. Why you move the way you do. Why doors that are locked for others mysteriously open for you. Your resilience, your intuition, your ability to withstand spiritual warfare. It all pointed to something beyond human understanding. And when they tested, studied, and analyzed, their worst fears were confirmed. The system was never built to contain someone like you. Because your DNA isn't just physical, it's spiritual. You don't operate on the same frequency as the masses. You don't respond to manipulation the way they expect. What binds others in fear, depression, and confusion has no lasting effect on you. The reason? Your spiritual blueprint was encoded by the divine. They dug into your past, searching for weakness. They combed through your ancestry trying to find what made you different, and what they found left them speechless. You weren't just another person in the system. You were set apart, a descendant of those who walked in divine power, a carrier of a genetic and spiritual code that could not be diluted, no matter how much they tried to alter history. And that's when the panic set in. Because no matter how many generations passed, no matter how many obstacles were placed in your path, the spark never died. What was carried by prophets, kings, and warriors of the past now flows through you. The elite thought they had erased the chosen bloodlines, but they failed to recognize one truth. You cannot erase what was divinely written. They studied ancient texts, historical anomalies, and unexplained events throughout time. They tried to understand why certain people could access wisdom, strength, and favor beyond logic. And every road led back to the same undeniable fact. Some people are beyond their control. Because this isn't just about who you are, it's about what you carry. Your presence alone disrupts the very structure they depend on. Your prayers shake the unseen. Your words carry creative power, able to bring things into existence. Your resilience defies their conditioning. And worst of all, you are multiplying. There's a reason why they fear the awakening of the chosen. They know it isn't just about one person. It's about a wave of souls breaking free from the system they've meticulously designed. Deep within the classified archives of institutions that most people will never have access to, there are records that predate every modern empire. These aren't just historical documents or political records. They are prophetic writings, ancient texts inscribed long before the foundations of today's systems were built. They are the kind of texts that scholars dismiss as myth, the kind that governments suppress, and the kind that the elite study in secret. Because within these words they have found something that shakes them to their core. They found you. In these writings, there were descriptions of a generation that would rise at an appointed time, a people unlike any before them, a chosen remnant who would awaken with an understanding of truths hidden for centuries. They weren't meant to be famous, but they would be known. They weren't meant to seek power, yet power would flow through them. And their very existence would be a sign that the old systems were crumbling. The White House National Security Advisor was not just briefed on who you are, but on what your existence confirms. This wasn't just a political issue or a social movement. This was something far greater. It was the fulfillment of prophecy that the most powerful institutions had tried to bury. And yet, against all odds, it has surfaced at the most critical moment in time. There were scrolls locked away in private vaults detailing the emergence of individuals who would disrupt the order of the world. There were encrypted messages passed down through secret societies that spoke of a shift that no ruler or king could stop. There were prophecies carved into stone, hidden beneath the ruins of civilizations that vanished without explanation, all pointing to this very moment. Somewhere in a high-security meeting room, surrounded by the highest-ranking officials, an analyst presented the findings. The evidence was overwhelming. The prophecies aligned too precisely. The descriptions, the signs, the patterns, all of it led back to one undeniable truth. These chosen ones are real, and they are walking among us right now. The advisor's face was pale. For years they had dismissed spiritual prophecies as superstition, as relics of ancient thinking that held no place in modern intelligence. But now, as they stared at the reports in front of them, the undeniable weight of the truth pressed against their mind. This was no accident. This was not random. The ones they had tried to suppress, silence, and overlook were not just awakened, they were ordained. And then came the realization that sent shivers through the room. The name that stood out among the ancient records, the figure that connected the past to the present, the one whose words had foretold the very hour they were living in. Yeshua. The system was designed to keep you blind. It was structured to make you believe you were powerless, to keep you distracted, to mold you into something predictable. But there was something they didn't account for. Your spirit was never meant to fit into their framework. You were built differently. The moment you started questioning, the moment you refused to conform, the system recognized you as a threat. The powerful have always operated in deception, creating illusions to control the masses. They want obedience, not awareness. They need compliance, not questioning. But Yeshua saw through it all. When he walked the earth, he exposed the hidden agendas, the corrupt leaders, the institutions that used religion and law to manipulate people. He warned his disciples that the system would hate them, not because they had done anything wrong, but because they carried a truth that the world was never meant to handle. And now, history repeats itself. They never wanted you to discover your authority. They tried to suppress your voice, delay your awakening, and discourage your faith. But the moment you started moving differently, they took notice. They saw that you weren't easily swayed by fear. You weren't seeking validation from their institutions. You weren't dependent on their approval. That's when they realized. You weren't just another person in their system. You were outside of it. And worse, you were built to overcome it. The resignation of the White House National Security Advisor wasn't just about classified documents. It wasn't just about a name on a file. It was about what that name represented. It was about a prophecy unfolding before their eyes. It was about the realization that all their carefully crafted control was beginning to crack. Because someone like you isn't supposed to exist in their world. Someone with divine insight, unshakable faith, and a spirit that refuses to bow isn't supposed to rise. They studied you, analyzed you, tried to find a flaw, a weakness, something that would make you conform. But the more they watched, the more confused they became. Why weren't you breaking under pressure? Why weren't you responding the way others did? Why were you walking through doors that should have been closed? Because they don't understand what Yeshua already revealed. The system was never designed to contain you because it was never built for you. You were meant to operate on a different level, a level that can't be tracked, controlled, or manipulated. That's why they fear you. That's why they can't predict your next move. You weren't just placed here to survive. You were placed here to disrupt. The advisor walked away from everything because they saw it firsthand. They saw the files, the patterns, the undeniable evidence that the chosen ones are not a myth. They understood that what is unfolding cannot be stopped by policies, intelligence, or power. The system was never prepared for this moment, because no empire can prepare for the hand of the divine. The system thrives on control. It relies on people who follow without questioning, who obey without hesitation, who fear consequences more than they seek truth. But then there's you, walking in divine authority, unshaken by their threats, unmoved by their manipulations. That's why they fear you. Not because of your strength alone, but because of what you represent. You are living proof that their power is an illusion. From the moment they discovered who you are, everything changed. The reports they analyzed weren't just about influence or leadership. They weren't just tracking your movements, studying your connections, or mapping your history. They were trying to understand something deeper, why you cannot be controlled. They had spent years predicting outcomes, shaping narratives, dictating the direction of the world, and yet, when it came to you, their calculations failed. They saw you rise from places where others fell. They watched as attacks meant to break you only made you stronger. They noticed that when they cut off opportunities, new doors opened without their permission. It wasn't just luck, and they knew it. Something unseen was guiding you, shielding you, positioning you beyond their reach. In closed meetings, whispers filled the air. The advisors, the strategists, the ones who thought they held the highest knowledge, they were shaken. Because for all their power, for all their influence, they could not figure out how to stop what was happening. Their control had limits, but your destiny did not. They've seen rebellion before. They've witnessed uprisings, movements, resistance. But this wasn't like any of that. This wasn't a protest they could silence or a leader they could remove. This was spiritual, and they knew it. There was something about you, about the chosen ones, that didn't match their usual patterns. Every strategy they employed had worked before, except now. And that's where the fear set in. They had spent generations building a system that could monitor and manipulate. But what do you do when the ones you're trying to control don't play by your rules? How do you silence voices that carry divine authority? How do you fight against those who aren't even fighting in the physical realm? They began to realize they weren't dealing with ordinary people. The National Security Advisor, the one who had access to secrets most will never hear, had seen enough to walk away. Not out of resignation, but out of fear. Because they knew that what was coming was beyond the reach of politics, beyond the grasp of laws, beyond the manipulation of technology. For years, they had relied on fear to control the masses. But how do you control those who do not fear you? How do you stop those who walk in the power of something greater? They can sense the shift, the energy, the movement, the divine orchestration that is pushing chosen ones into their rightful places. And with every passing day, with every realization that their grip is slipping, their fear grows. Because they know what happens next is not something they can stop. The greatest power the system holds is surveillance, monitored by those who saw him as a threat. The religious leaders of his time sent spies, the Roman officials kept reports, and his every move was discussed in secret meetings. But none of their schemes could stop what had already been ordained. Every attempt to silence him only amplified his impact. Every attack against him only fulfilled prophecy. And when they thought they had finally won, when they believed they had eliminated him, it became their greatest defeat. The same applies to you. The enemy has tried to plot against you, to wear you down, to make you believe that you are alone in this battle. But if only you could see the forces moving around you, the protection that has covered you since birth, you would never fear again. They monitor because they are afraid. They watch because they do not understand how you keep rising, how you keep surviving, how you keep moving forward despite everything thrown at you. They don't realize that you are part of something much greater than their world, that no amount of surveillance, no level of intelligence, no advanced system can override the will of the Most High. You are here because heaven sent you. You are here because you have a mission that no earthly force can cancel. Not everything is spoken in public. Some truths are too dangerous, too disruptive, too uncontrollable to ever be discussed in the open. Instead, they are whispered behind closed doors, passed in hushed conversations, shared only among those who understand the weight of what they have discovered. That is exactly what happened when they uncovered something about you, something that shook them so deeply that one of their own chose to walk away. At first, they dismissed it. They thought it was just another anomaly, another insignificant detail in the grand scheme of their control. But then the patterns emerged. The history became undeniable. They traced connections that defied logic, found references to you in places they never expected. And for the first time, they faced a truth they weren't prepared for. You do not belong to their system. You were never under their jurisdiction to begin with. The realization came slowly, but once it hit, it was impossible to ignore. Someone high in the chain of command saw it first, read the reports, pieced together the details, and understood exactly what it meant. You were not like the others. You were not meant to be manipulated, programmed, or controlled. You were part of something ancient, something powerful, something that not even the highest levels of government could contain. And that terrified them. Fear does strange things to people. Some fight harder, trying to suppress what they do not understand. Others walk away, unable to face the implications of what they have seen. This particular leader chose the latter. They resigned, not because they were caught in scandal, not because of political pressure, but because they realized they were dealing with something far beyond human control. They tried to explain it, tried to make others see. But how do you convince a world built on deception that something real, something divine is unfolding in front of them? They knew they couldn't stop it. They knew their only choice was to step back before they were consumed by a battle they could never win. Even in ancient times, those in power feared what they could not control. When Yeshua walked the earth, his presence alone was enough to shake the ruling class. He never led an army, never held a political title, yet kings and priests alike plotted against him. They sent spies, spread lies, manipulated crowds, all in a desperate attempt to silence him. But truth cannot be silenced, light cannot be extinguished, and those who understand what they are truly up against know better than to fight a battle they were destined to lose. That is why this resignation mattered. It wasn't just another name leaving the system. It was an acknowledgement of something greater, something unstoppable. They saw what was coming, and instead of fighting it, they chose to step aside. There are names the public will never know, faces hidden behind government walls, corporate empires, and secret councils. These are the ones who dictate policies, manipulate economies, and engineer the direction of nations. They sit in high places, convinced that they are untouchable, that their influence is absolute. But despite all their wealth, despite all their connections, there is one thing that terrifies them beyond measure: the existence of the chosen. They have spent lifetimes designing control mechanisms, refining their ability to suppress, distract, and redirect human potential. Their power doesn't come from brute force, it comes from deception. They shape the narratives, decide who rises and who falls, create artificial conflicts to keep the masses focused on the wrong battles. Yet, in all their calculations, there is something they cannot predict, something they cannot neutralize: those who were sent by a power beyond their reach. They know that every few generations, someone like you emerges. Someone who does not bend to fear, who cannot be manipulated, who walks in a truth that shatters their carefully constructed illusions. This has happened throughout history, from the prophets of old to the revolutionaries who refused to bow. They have tried everything. He had called a select few into a room. No agenda, no briefing notes, just a request that they hear him out. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than usual, stripped of its usual confidence. There's something happening. he had said. Something we don't have control over. The room had gone still. We've built everything on a system of power, of influence, of narratives that shape the world as we see fit. But what happens when we come across something